The name's Larry Herman, and I spent the first quarter of my life in New York and came to Britain in 1968. I worked Fleet Street for a very short time. I didn't last there. I was always much more interested in what lay behind an event, a news event, than the event itself. I came to Glasgow on an assignment. Penguin did a book called Seven Modern Poets, and I was one of the photographers. There were three. I went off, and one of the poets that I photographed was Edwin Morgan in Glasgow. And I spent 3, 4, 5 weeks just walking around the streets. Being in Glasgow showed me the real roots of New York City. And so I spent these weeks with Edwin and did a hell of a lot of talking. And I went back with a camera bag full of film and whatnot, and quotes and several of his books. And I spent the next couple of years finishing up another project that I was working on. And also I began going to Northern Ireland during what's called the Troubles and spending a good deal of my time there. But I always was trying to get myself back to Glasgow somehow. Finally did. I got a couple of Arts Council grants, and I think I got a bursary at this time. And I just felt like I was walking on air. I mean, it just released this necessary but horrible problem of earning a living. As a photographer, I've always wanted to do things that I felt important. And one of the things I wanted to document was the industrial Clydeside. And almost immediately, I defined industry from agriculture to the heavies, shipbuilding, coal, and so on, and everything in between, textiles. But I began to photograph the people of the Clyde in the context of work. Work defines who we are. Consequently, I went into people's homes, I went to meetings, union meetings, social meetings. The project itself, I stopped shooting, I think it was after about 3 years, 74 to 76. And I had an exhibition at the old Third Eye Center, which traveled around. One of the indications of the way I work is I actually spend most of my time talking to people. And I wanted to photograph domestic abuse. And I made contact with organizations on the Clyde. I spent a long time talking to them, and they allowed me access to a interval house for domestic abuse to photograph women who have finally made the decision to change their environment, which was subject to extreme abuse. So that image is an indication of how I work. Another photograph is one captioned Andy Ozzy Oswald. I was walking through the center of Glasgow, going to where I was crashing very late at night, very early in the morning. And these three guys came up to me and asked me for a match, and I just sort of laughed, and I immediately said, if you rob me, I've got nothing. Anyway, we sat on the curb and spoke for a couple of hours, and Ozzy gave me his address, and a week or so, whatever, later, I turned up on his doorstep, and I spent a long time with his family. Where Ozzy lived was right in a district of Glasgow called Blackhill. It is right against Ballinny maximum security prison. And people on the estate would have relatives in Ballinny, and they would shout over the wall. And once in a while, someone from the estate would just throw something over the wall. I haven't the slightest idea what it was or who got it, but whatever. It was hilarious. Anyway, I developed a relationship with the Oswald family, and I photographed Ozzy, spent a lot of time with Ozzy. I generally think in terms of projects And one of them was the Red Road Flats, which became a metaphor for me and thousands of other people too. The abuse of people in forcing them to live in conditions that they were never asked permission to build in the first place. And the Red Road Flats was symbolic of that. There were 3 blocks, each over 30 stories. And I spent months, I don't know, 6 months, concerned with the Red Road Flats and photographing there, knocking on doors and asking if I could come in and have a talk. And people were extraordinarily open. The photograph that I've used is in the lift, which was, for me, this extraordinary expression of what it was like to live in the Red Road Flats. There were lifts, 2 lifts in the whole block. Thousands of people lived there, if you could imagine. One lift was broken frequently. It took me one day 45 minutes to get from the top floor to street level. There were no facilities on the estate, no pubs and nothing like that. I spent a long time photographing at the Ravenscraig Steelworks in Motherwell. One of the startling things for me was the size of the engineering. A lathe turning something that weighed 150 tons with tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. The skill involved was just awe-inspiring. In Dunoon, I wanted to photograph how the nuclear submarine base fitted in the local community. The American sailors, for all intents and purposes, could have been anywhere in the world. They had their own military shops where they bought things. They had their own television stations and food, and they didn't join the Navy to see the world. And the photograph that I finally settled upon was this oversized American in Dunoon. I am a working photographer. Over the decades, I might have done 6 or 7 or 8 projects. I just recently finished. I stopped shooting it a couple of years ago, but I finally did the final edit of Wage London, and that was a project that took 12 years, about where people work in London and where they sell their labor by the hour. In other words, waged London as opposed to salaried. And the line between the two is fuzzy. I also have been doing a project in Cuba for the last 4 years, photographing where Cubans work with the assistance of the Cuban Federation of Workers. And they have a whole portfolio now in their permanent archive of my work. And they also mounted an exhibition last May Day. Another edition is traveling around Britain and was recently at the Ruskin College in Oxford and is going to go to trade unions and other organizations around the country.